where I've proven scientifically, undoubtedly, existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Quran is the word of Almighty God. If you use science to the Quran, what we come to know that whatever the Quran has said today, 80% can be proved to be 100% correct scientifically. Quran speaks about various scientific facts, which we came to know recently. It talks about astronomy.
The Quran tells us that a character named Dhul-Qarnayn roams the earth and reaches that setting place of the sun. There, he finds it setting in a muddy spring. Now, Muslim apologists try to explain this by saying, A, this is explained from Dhul-Qarnayn's perspective, or B, he sees it as if it was setting in a muddy spring. But the text doesn't contain any of that. In the text, it is Allah who clearly describes that Dhul-Qarnayn went to the setting place and found the sun setting in a muddy spring. Why would Allah describe it in the glorious Holy Quran with Dhul-Qarnayn's ignorant assumption? This verse completely reveals the primitiveness of the Quran and discredits the whole religion. How you could explain this reasonably is that Muhammad and his companions didn't know about the shape of the earth and our solar system.
It speaks about the spherical nature of the earth.
Eratosthenes, who lived about 850 years before Muhammad existed, not only knew the earth was spherical, but measured the circumference of the earth was accurate to the true figure we know today to roughly 1%. Far more impressive than someone 800 years later saying it was egg-shaped. But again, did Muhammad actually say the earth was egg-shaped? Well, the Quran clearly states the earth is flat, like a carpet, or a wide expanse, in 18 Quranic verses. Zakir Naik ignores all these verses, then goes to one verse where he claims there may be two meanings for the word, and one of them is ostrich egg. Let's see if the haha actually means what Zakir Naik claims. Al-Tabari's exegesis, one of the most thorough in Islamic history, cites 18 different hadiths relating to an explanation of the verse. Not a single hadith says it means the earth is spherical. If you actually understood Arabic, you'll know dahaha means extending. It isn't even the name for an ostrich egg. The only reason it's mildly associated is because an ostrich produces an expanse with a small bit of the ground where it lays its eggs. So even with this meaning, the word is referring to the place where an ostrich egg is laid, and has nothing to do with the egg itself.
It speaks about the Big Bang.
Do they not see the heavens and the earth were one entity and we separated them? Heaven being separated from earth is a very old idea, and many creation myths mention it. The Sumerian Song of Ho said, "Did he hasten to separate heaven from earth, and hasten to separate earth from heaven?" The Babylonian myth of Enuma Elish says, "When the heavens had been separated from the earth." In the Chinese creation myth, Pangu separated earth from sky. In ancient Egyptian mythology, Jeb, representing earth, and Nut, representing heaven, were separated on the orders of the god Ra. Under no circumstances can the Big Bang be described as separating heaven from earth. The Big Bang wasn't an explosion of matter, it was an expansion of space. At no point was the earth separated from anything. On the contrary, earth came together from debris 9 billion years after the initial expansion.
It speaks about the light of the moon is not its own reflected light.
Well, Aristarchus of Samos knew the moon was reflecting the sun's light nearly 1,000 years before Muhammad was even born. Moving on to your claim that this is mentioned in the Quran, again, it's not mentioned in the Quran. I can't believe you have the nerve to pretend that the word nur in Arabic means reflected light, or it most certainly does not. Nur means light, plain and simple. The word nur or munir appears 39 times in the Quran. Nowhere at all does it appear to be talking about reflected light. Let's read a couple of verses with the word nur in them and see whether your definition of the word makes sense. Allah is the guardian of those who believe. He brings them out of the darkness into the reflected light. They desire to put out the reflected light of Allah with their mouths. Allah is the reflected light of the heavens and the earth. On top of all that, we have this verse saying as the moon will lose its own light on Judgment Day. I've looked at all the major Sunni exegeses, Ibn Kathir, Jalalain, At-Tabari, and Tanwir al-Nukhbas, and all of them say clearly that the moon has its own light extinguished. No reference at all to reflected light.
It speaks about the water cycle.
As you can see, it's certainly not miraculous knowledge. The ancient Greeks knew a lot more about the water cycle, and even the Bible has verses that are more accurate.
It speaks about biology. It speaks.
Where does sperm come from? We know it comes from testicles. But according to the Quran, It comes from between backbones and ribs.
It's about botany.
We can go ahead and count 2 more mistakes and dismiss both of them with the same explanation. Neither plants nor fruits have necessarily all 2 mates, and many reproduce by themselves, like dandelions, that spread asexually by seed.
It's about zoology.
The Quran claims Allah created 8 types of livestock for humans. It goes on and counts those as sheep, goats, camels, and oxen or cows. It counts these 4 types as 8, including male and female. The problem is that the Quran's knowledge suffers from the geographical limits of its birthplace. People in Arabia didn't have deer as livestock, for example, while other cultures were much dependent on deer at the same time, which is a completely different animal from those counted here. No explanation to these Quran verses saves the Quran from being wrong.
It's about embryology.
The Quran makes references to the development of a fetus. However, the ancient Greeks, as well as others, described this in similar terms long before Islam. For example, compare these Quranic statements to those of Galen 500 years before Muhammad.
All these things. Now, today is the age of science and technology. If we put this test of science to the Quran, what we come to know, 80% whatever the Quran has said is 100% perfectly correct. The balance 20% is ambiguous, neither right, neither wrong. Out of the 20%, not even 0.01% has been proved to be wrong by scientific fact. It is ambiguous.
My dad, for example, he's a pilot, okay, for about 40 years now for his life. Like, he knows that the Earth is not flat. When I mentioned some verses from the Quran to him and what Muhammad said, he's like, oh, son, science keeps changing, but the Quran doesn't. So maybe 200-300 years later, science will prove that the Earth might be flat. You know, you can't trust the Hollywood people. Yeah. Maybe all of that's just fake.
The Earth isn't flat. And by the way, this is called gravity.
What my logic says, when 80% is 100% correct, and not even 0.01% of the 20% is proved wrong. So my logic says that inshallah, even that 20% will be correct.
But from what we can say about the Book of Mormon, with the limited amount we have, we've got some good stuff. If it was made up, we wouldn't have those things. If it was made up.
Wait a minute, because if we look at other historical documents like the Iliad and the Odyssey, we can say that a lot of the things written in those books, we can say the same thing about. Like, there's a lot of true things in there, but there's also a lot of false things. And we don't consider them to be historically accurate just because some of the stuff it says is true. Take any historical document at all, and we see that it has some true things. We don't then say, well, the other things it says are also true. So like the Iliad and the Odyssey mentions things like Troy, and Troy existed, but it also mentions things like Cyclops and Sirens. We don't grant that the Cyclops and Sirens are true just because we know Troy is true. So even if we grant some of the things are true in Joseph Smith's testimony, that doesn't mean we should give the other claims also credence just because some of the things are true for the same reason.
That what is the Islamic view on theory of evolution? As far as the question on theory of evolution is come, there is no book so far that I have read which talks about fact of evolution.
Read more.
Okay.
Find some evidence. I'm extraordinarily sick and tired of this particular accusation.
And that's a fact.
When we talk about theory of evolution, we start thinking of Charles Darwin. He wrote a book called The Origin of Species. And in that book, he says that he went on a ship by the name of HMS Beagle, and he went on an island by the name of Calotropis.
There is no such island as the Calotropis Islands anywhere. It was actually the Galapagos Islands that Darwin visited, where he found finches.
And there he saw birds pecking in niches.
Finches do not peck at niches, as Naik says. They lived in separate ecological niches.
Now, depending upon the niches, the holes they pecked, the beak became short and long.
The differences Darwin observed between these finches were far more than simply beak length. They included differences in color, size, mating behavior, songs, and preferred food.
Based on this observation, he propounded his theory of evolution. He propounded natural selection. And Charles Darwin, he wrote a letter to his friend Thomas Thompson.
All of Darwin's published correspondence is printed and even available electronically online, and it contains no record of anyone named Thomas Thompson.
And he said that I do not have proof as far as my theory of evolution is concerned. There are missing links.
Darwin admitted that there were missing links, but that does not mean he disagreed with his own theory. He simply predicted where the missing links would be found.
So there is no proof regarding Darwin's theory at all. It's a theory, it's not a fact.
Theory for the average non-scientist means something very different from what it means for a scientist. What we mean in modern parlance would be, I've got a hunch, I've got a guess. Don't really have facts to support the idea, but that's my, I've got a hunch about that. That is not what scientists mean when they use the word theory. I think we'd all agree that gravity exists. Why? Because through repeated observations, we've shown that gravitational attraction is a fact. Now, gravitational theory is something different. Isaac Newton had a theory about how gravity works. Albert Einstein has a theory about how gravity works that encompasses Newton's ideas. So the explanation for how gravity works, that's a theory. So when we use the word theory, it doesn't mean a hunch. No, it's something so compelling that it is the dominant paradigm by which we understand lots of biological phenomena.
Now, in most of the schools, they teach Darwin theory as though it's a fact because they don't have any alternative.
That Darwinian evolution is contrasted against Lamarckian evolution. Lamarck's theory couldn't pass the test, but Darwin's did.
Philosopher of science Joshua Moritz lists several different views on how evolution happens, from Lamarckian evolution, Darwinian natural selection, neo-Darwinian evolution, niche construction, evolution through symbiogenesis, evo-devo, process structuralism, and others.
Most of the scientists today they do not agree with Darwin's theory.
It's false.
As far as you talked about the 4 waves of hominoids,
there are not a mere 4 hominids, there are at least 14.
All these that you find, there is no link between them.
Actually, evolutionary biologists have found many examples of what they claim to be links between these stages. For example, Homo habilis, Homo ergaster, and Homo heidelbergensis.
Now, many things of Darwin is correct. For example, life was created from water. That Quran also says.
We made from water every living thing. The claim is that the Quran confirms life originated in seas and lakes. However, again, this idea predates the Quran. The book of Genesis echoes the creation myths previously mentioned, and then says, "And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth." The ancient Greek philosopher Thales said water was the nature of all things, and Anaximander put forward the astonishingly far-sighted view that life started from warm water and earth, and emerged from fish-like creatures from the sea.
So many things of Darwin is correct, but as a whole, everything is not true. That we have been evolved for apes, is not at all. If there was evolution today, we should be having some people who are in between monkeys and human beings. We don't find that in any museum.
It's false.
Over 6,000 individuals now we have cataloged in hominin evolution. If you lined up all these skulls and put them in a row, you're seeing microevolution from one to the other. And if you look at it over it as a whole, it becomes macro. I mean, you can line up Australopithecus on the left, modern human on the right, and every little minor change is a macro change. But you go back and look at the first skull and the last skull, and everybody's going to say, oh yeah, that's a different species. That's macroevolution. We just witnessed a change in kind by studying the fossil record. Australopithecus afarensis female on the left, Homo sapiens female on the right. I don't think anybody's going to disagree that we have two different species.
It is absurd to think that our DNA of the human beings have been evolved from ape. It's not possible at all.
And it turns out that we share like 98.9% of our DNA with chimps. Of course, the question then becomes, where's the differences? About half the differences in gene expression have to do with genes coding for olfactory receptors. Chimps have a better sense of smell than we do. All sorts of genes they have for olfactory receptors we've inactivated. What that tells us is if you wipe out half of a chimp's sense of smell genetically, you're halfway there to making a human. This is not very impressive. Okay, so what other genes have been identified? Some having to do with like the size of the pelvic arch. We walk upright, they don't as often. Some of it turns out to have to do with body hair. They're covered with fur, and it's only some humans that have like the guys with hair on their shoulders. There's some genetics about immune recognition, aspects of reproductive isolation, so you're unlikely to get chimp-human hybrids. All that accounts for almost all the genetic differences. Where are the genes that are relevant to the brain? And it turns out there's hardly any. We've got the same nervous system basically that chimps do. There's only one difference, which is we've got like 3 times as many neurons. And what the genetic differences are genes having to do with the number of rounds of cell division during fetal brain development. Essentially what that says is take a chimp brain fetally and let it go 2 or 3 more rounds of division and you get a human brain instead.
I'm sorry your knowledge is so weak and I wouldn't like to continue. I'm not here to teach 2 + 2 = 4.